Welcome, dear listeners. I'm Nandita, and you are listening to Kaam Ki Baat, a podcast on women, work, and everything in between, brought to you by Behanbox. We are again at a juncture where we must grapple with the harsh reality of how unsafe most workplaces are for women in India. From the brutal rape and killing of a doctor working night shift in a hospital in Kolkata to the damning Justice Hema Committee report on sexual harassment in the Malayalam film industry. But in this episode, I want to talk about the women who are invisibilized from this conversation. They're not invisible, they're women and they're workers. They face sexual violence at workplaces, schools, and hostels. But in most cases, we, who occupy dominant caste and class positions in the society, do not see them. We do not come out on the streets for them because we choose to look the other way. I'm talking about Dalit and Adivasi women who face an unprecedented rate of sexual violence in this country, exacerbated by their caste and class locations. The National Council of Women Leaders, a collective that was formed in 2020, has released two reports that document the sexual violence against Dalit women and against Adivasi women. We have with us Dr. Shewli Kumar, who is one of the founding members of the collective and associate professor at Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, and Augustina Soreng, who is a grassroots activist from Jharkhand, also working with NCWL. First, Dr. Shewli Kumar. Welcome, Shewli. Could you tell us why you decided to do the two reports at the NCWL?
The National Council for Women Leaders came about after a very long time. In fact, as you know, the Dalit movement has been pretty active in India. From 2001 onward, the movement became very strong, especially with the World Conference Against Racism happening. So they did start working with women specifically, but mostly a lot of women's issues got subsumed within the movement. And there were women activists like Manjula Pradeep, and you had Ruth Panorama, Fatima Bernard, and they would get together and they would say that no, women's issues are different and they need to be understood differently. And that started a conversation. And then since I have been constantly being in touch and besides being a full-time professor, I would, meet up and go for their meetings and any kind of collective movements, do trainings and things like that. I've done a lot of fact-finding on atrocities against Dalit women, Dalit people. The one thing that I understood, especially in one case, it was very clear that women's voices are getting really lost, even when we are doing fact-finding. Because the woman would want justice, but the men would compromise with the money compensation and things like that. So that was that came through in a couple of cases, and I said, this is not right. And so Manjula and I started a conversation, and Manjula had moved out of Navsarjan, a big, Dalit organization, and she was looking for, developing grassroots activists. She'd already done a lot of work in Gujarat, but nationally, there were collectives, different kinds of Dalit women, but we were not doing very consolidated work. So she and I had a conversation, and she had conversations with other activists, and they all said that, we need to create a separate space, and what we need to focus is on developing leadership of the, Dalit activists, because they are doing their work, they are doing the fact finding, they are supporting victims and survivors of sexual violence, and it's just rampant. Hatter's case was only like a flash in the pan, literally, because every day there was arson happening. They were reporting it all the time, and we were doing the collation and documentation of all these atrocities and sexual violence. Then the conversation started with the Adivasi activists as well, because we were aligned in different groups, and they said that Dalit women face a lot of sexual violence, but even Adivasi women face a lot of sexual violence, and it's a different kind of sexual violence. So these conversations were happening when COVID was there, and we started having more online meetings. It gave us an opportunity to also start brainstorming on issues. And then we felt that we really haven't got adequate data or a proper research which can showcase and say that this is how rampant it is. So our idea at the National Council for Women Leaders is essentially looking at Dalit, Adivasi, Bahujan women. So we also want to work with Muslim women. We want to work with other minority women, and we want to also simultaneously build leadership. And we are talking of grassroots women. We are not talking of already existing activists. They are doing their work and excellently. But I think what we need to do is create a bigger cadre of grassroots women who are working there, but they don't know how the law works. They don't know how to do advocacy. They don't know how to do research. And also self-care. Because every day you are, dealing with these cases, there's hardly any time to sit back and look after yourself. And that's very important in a feminist way of paying attention to yourself. So all these discussions happened, and so during COVID, we felt that we were getting a lot of reportage of cases, and then Hathras happened. Before that, already we were getting a lot of reportage from the activists. So then we said that okay, we need to do a proper research, and that's how we decided we'll begin with caste-based sexual violence. And so therefore, we started talking to the activists, and we said, okay, how will we do it? What will be the components of this research? So everybody said, see, we have a very strong law, the Scheduled Caste, Scheduled Tribes Atrocities Act, Prevention of Atrocities Act, and nobody wants to take it up. Nobody wants to talk about it. And we are working for its implementation. We are demanding that cases should be registered within, and not just as ordinary rape cases or, assault cases. So that started the second conversation that we should look at the status of implementation of this law. So then most of the activists said that we can do case studies, we can bring out all the elements of these, and we can look at the process in terms of seeking justice, talking to the first FIR, then what happens in the medical exam, is a copy of the report given. So the nitty-gritties of the law that they were telling the survivors, whether it's getting implemented or not, that was the discussion and that led to our doing this research. And when we did this research, our Adivasi compatriots and activists said that we also, let's do a research, similar research with the Adivasi women, because there's a lot of sexual violence happening. And the Adivasi women's issues are not getting highlighted at all, because at least the Dalit movement is very visible. So, people take it seriously. But when it comes to Adivasi women facing violence, there's hardly any reportage. And even today, if you look at it, there's very little reportage on what's happening in most of the Adivasi areas. And every day there is sexual violence. So that's how then we decided to do the second research. Yeah.
So if we were to just take a step back, so you mentioned how it was spurred by the fact that, within Dalit people itself, like the concerns of women were getting sidelined. So amongst women, why do you think it's important to talk about sexual violence against Dalit, Adivasi and Bahujan women, as you said, as a separate category?
So the nature and form of violence, the way it is done, it is the exercise of power by the dominant group. It's very clear. It is not just about men. It is about asserting your caste. It is about telling, most of the, cases that we come across, and always, it is about trying to tell the Dalit groups that your women need to be agriculture workers. They can't go to school. If you look at the history of the cases, and even the Hathras case, this girl was going to school. She was educating herself, and she would just do that agriculture work to support her family. The manifestation of the violence comes from this, that ये लोग कैसे पढ़ लिख रहे हैं, हमारा काम कौन करेगा, हमारा खेती बाड़ी का काम, all the dirty work that is assigned caste wise, and a lot of it is done by women, whether it is daily wage agriculture or manual scavenging, it's all done by women, so putting them in place is the idea and the assertion of power. And sexual violence is to say that your women are signifiers of your caste, and look, we can do anything with the honor of your caste group. So you better be careful. If the violation of your women is not just about her body, but her body we own. And we can do whatever with it, So that's where the caste dimension becomes very clear. you know, the ways in which it's perpetuated, it's appalling. You know, it's very clear that, and it's always somebody who is from the same village,
Yeah.
somebody known, somebody with whom you're working, you know, who are trying to tell you that stay in your place. You're not staying in your place. Your daughter is not staying in your place. That's the message. That being part of, don't try to change the caste system.
No, you already brought in work, and I was also thinking about how important it is to mention that, these cases of sexual violence are so intricately tied to work. So, on the one hand, while the threat of sexual violence hinders women's access to education and employment, Adivasi and Dalit women in this case, many instances of violence mentioned in the reports also take place in workplaces or in places of education, like the case of the sexual violence in government run hostels for Adivasi girls, or the fact that landless Dalit women are raped by the men of landowning dominant castes who are often their employers. So how do we view sexual violence as something that fundamentally hinders women's access to education and employment?
So there's something called structural discrimination that's very important for us to look at. This structural discrimination is also institutionalized. Just to give you comparative, not to, kind of, and this discourse you must have heard when it comes to Nirbhaya or even the today's case, people are mobilizing, they're coming together and they're demanding justice. Yeah. But when it's happening to Dalit women or Adivasi women, nobody is coming together or shouting on the streets or painting the town red and saying this is unacceptable and it should not happen. That's one, which tells us that there is a institutionalized discrimination which is so embedded, and that's about the attitudes of discrimination and not having. If you look at the report, not having people from the communities in majority, either in the police system or in the judiciary or in the medical fraternity. In case of, say, Payal Tadvi's case in Maharashtra, justice hasn't been done, and they've been let off because she was a Dalit and she was from a denotified tribe. Justice doesn't happen. And there was no furor. People didn't come out into the streets. Even the women's movement did not come out on the streets. As in the case of this case, or in the case of the Nirbhaya case, which we all well know of. And Justice Committee was set up, Justice Verma Committee was set up to look at criminal laws. And let me also illustrate out here that Babri Devi and Mathura did not get justice. The law changed, but their cases are still pending in the court. Their perpetrators have died or moved on in their life and they've been given bail. There's no justice for them. That question is not being raised. Justice means that you get some recourse from the court. That's not happening. That tells you something, yeah? That this institutionalized discrimination is very much rampant, and there are parallels for you to, look at, and it.
So, if I may just remind our listeners here, Bhavri Devi was a Dalit woman, a social worker from Rajasthan who was gang raped by dominant caste men in 1992 for trying to stop a child marriage in a dominant caste Gujjar family. And the fact that she was raped at work led to the Vishakha guidelines on sexual harassment at the workplace, so the sexual harassment law in India. But ironically, Bhavri Devi never got justice. Her rapists have either been acquitted or have died. The Mathura case, on the other hand, was of custodial rape of a young Adivasi girl in 1972 by policemen. Her rapists were also acquitted. So 1972, 1992, and now we're in 2024, but not much seems to have changed for Dalit and Adivasi women. The same patterns continue and justice remains elusive. When we think of sexual harassment at the workplace, for instance, we imagine corporate workplaces or universities. We never think of landless women laborers in the farms being at the receiving end of sexual violence as facing sexual harassment at work. So I think our very imagination is so kind of geared towards only seeing a middle class, upper caste woman as a victim that I think, crisis of imagination to begin with.
Not just that, work is also defined like that. If you look at all the data that is there, work is defined only in the organized sector. So the women working in agricultural labor, she's either seen as somebody as family labor or not. The brick kiln workers in Maharashtra are from the Kapkari tribe group. And my PhD student is doing sexual harassment in unorganized sector. So data is telling you that how much sexual violence they are facing. It's not just harassment, like being verbal abuse, or it's physical, it's rape. you know. So when you define work also, you're only looking at organized work and you're looking at professional so-called work. You're not looking at manual scavenging as work. You're not
Hmm.
looking at the brick kiln worker as a worker. The law also doesn't define them that well. You know, so therefore she's invisible. She's not in anybody's imagination. Yeah,
That's very, very
and the middle
important.
class has a very typical attitude of saying that um, हाँ वो काम करते हैं, मजबूरी में काम करते हैं, या वो काम नहीं करेंगे तो फिर हमारा क्या होगा. you know we- there are these very peculiar drawing room conversations. I'm talking of ordinary commonplace not done gender studies kind of people who just don't believe that there should be equality, that cause suffering or problems are equal to or more than yours. That acknowledgement does not exist,
Yeah.
and that's structural discrimination. Yeah. So that needs to be looked into.
Speaking of structural discrimination, tell us a bit more about how difficult it is for Dalit and Adivasi women to access justice.
So if you look at the profile of Dalit and Adivasis, there's just one small percentage which has reached the middle class and has more access to resources. The larger group is impoverished. They don't have access to education. There's a denial of access to what we call decent livelihoods by the ILO terminologies. So for and they're dependent on the dominant caste groups and dominant groups for livelihoods. So if I look at Dalit groups, this is the Dalit communities, and I've seen it with my own eyes because uh, my husband belongs to a village which is a Dalit village, and I know what happens out there. So it's you're dependent on job on the same group which is violating you.
Hmm.
You know, uh, so therefore it's very hard to break that because you don't have any access. And if you go to the police station, the person who's sitting there is from a dominant caste group. So he is viewing you from a caste gender lens, and he will say, okay, you keep complaining, and this is wrong, and this is not right, and I know that guy. It's all the kinship networks that come into play. So the police person will never lodge a FIR. It's a lot of hard work from the activists, and they face a lot of backlash and resistance to just get an FIR lodged. Taking the person for medical examination, the doctors, till date, what we have found in our report, they don't know that the two finger test is banned. It's against human rights. The Supreme Court has banned it. They're still using it. You know. So when we say access, can you imagine a woman who's been assaulted, who has been called a caste name, and she's in a very bad shape? She goes to the medical examiner, and the medical examiner conducts a two-finger test on her to prove that she was not a virgin and that she's used to sexual relationships. That's what happened in the Mathura rape case, if you remember. And read the documents and the judgments that were given. So this is the structural discrimination which deprives the Dalit woman from accessing the corridors of justice or to lodge her case. I'm not saying the other women don't have this issue; they also have, but it's more so when you belong to a Dalit community. That's one, yeah. And the second, when it comes to Adivasi women, they live in very remote corners of the country. First of all, just to go and lodge an FIR for them is very hard. Second of all, there is a stereotyping of Adivasi women as being sexually promiscuous, which is also there in terms of Dalit women. It's a cultural thing, and obviously, I think it's great that they can exercise their sexual agency, but I think, but it's not seen like that. It's seen as promiscuity, availability, her body for my usage kind of a approach that the system has, the institution has, and Adivasi women have faced violence even from the state system,
Hmm.
the judiciary, not the judiciary, the police, their own people, the tribal youth who has been indoctrinated and put in as Earlier it was the Salwa Judum program, and now I think it's known as GRF. And they're trained to, in the name of rooting out Naxalism. They are the ones who are doing these assaults.
Hmm.
So it's very sad the way Adivasi women are facing a different kind and nature of violence, which is never highlighted or talked about.
But also the
Otherwise,
involvement.
why should so? Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah,
No,
continue.
I was talking about the involvement of police and security personnel themselves, in violence against Adivasi women, which you highlight in the
Yeah.
report. And Dalit and Adivasi women are also treated differently when it comes to rehabilitation, right? Like providing them with a dignified medical exam, as you mentioned, but also mental health support as per the law.
Yeah.
So can it be pinned down just to lack of awareness, or is there something more there?
No, it's not lack of awareness. I feel it's this attitude and structural discrimination. See, awareness is that I don't know, and I'm not very clear what kind of problems Dalit women or Adivasi women face. So therefore, I am not able to, counsel them or provide them with a room where they can come and talk. One is that the kind of services that they require is that the counselors have to be very clear about structural discrimination and their own caste within themselves, their own discriminatory attitudes within themselves, because then you disbelieve the survivor. If you begin with a space of disbelief, then you cannot counsel. Yeah, counseling services are not available, and I have yet to meet a counselor who knows that I'm coming from a space of structural discrimination. There are very few. They're doing excellent work, but they're very few. How many can they reach out to? It means the numbers of Dalit Adivasi women is huge who are facing and have faced or survived sexual violence. And the counselors who are trained like that to look at structural discrimination and then work from there are very few. So therefore there is no service available. And in fact the government does not believe in investing in those services anymore. You know, it's a very different ball game altogether. That's another story. You do a policy analysis and you see where the budget is really going.
Hmm.
So that's why they don't get help.
That's an interesting area. So, speaking of like the state's approach towards sexual violence against, especially Dalit and Adivasi women, like which direction are they going in? What is their approach towards redressal? Or what kind of support are they trying to
So,
provide?
I don't think the state is providing any support. None of the states, because one, um, they don't understand structural discrimination. They don't want to acknowledge that it exists. So that's first. Second, there's no resources that is being specifically allocated for Dalit and tribal groups. Though there is the SCST component plan which they are supposed to put in resources for at least these two groups, but it's not really coming in that well. Except perhaps you can say states like Tamil Nadu and all are still doing it, even though sexual violence exists. That's one. Um, um, the other part is that accessibility of these services. Where will they go? If you go to which used to be the counseling place, the one-stop centers, which are now almost shut shop and not really working. The counselors, unless they are trained, they are not able to handle it. But if you look at our report on Adivasi women, you will find that because one of the OSC counselors and caseworkers was trained by us, she did an excellent job of getting redress for this girl who was trafficked from Rajasthan. She knew exactly when and what kind of evidence building has to be done, how the FIR should be written, that a copy has to be given, all that she made. So unless everything is done, the documentation is done properly, you will not get justice, because everything is dependent in the court. You have to give evidence. Yeah. And the first thing that today most of the perpetrators are doing is killing the woman or making sure that the evidence is lost. So what happens is that I'm raped. I go to the police station. They send me for medical examination. In between, all the evidence gets lost because they are delayed, and I'm not told what I need to preserve. A first instance I would do is take a bath because I'm disgusted with myself, and then I destroy evidence. Who tells the girl that, you don't need to do that, you need to bear with it, counseling happens side by side, and then she is taken through the process. Only when it comes to our activists who are working side by side on cases, because they have been trained, they are able to get to some level of justice. And that with Adivasi women, we've not been yet able to do that very well. And I'm acknowledging that we need to work harder. But I'm saying state is not providing any kind of service or support to this work. I wish they would, and they would train the police. They would consistently take the police people to book or the medical fraternity to book to say you've not done your job well. That is also not happening. Forget the perpetrators. Because if we don't have evidence, then the case falls down. You're not able to get justice because the court says that there's no evidence. Sorry, this is hearsay. We don't know. That happens. Unless you do media publicity and blitzkrieg and then everybody's scared and they say, okay, we need to do something. And unfortunately, there's a very scary trend that's coming now that all perpetrators should face death penalty.
Yeah, should be hanged within 15
What they don't say. Yeah, I mean, and when you say that and you bring in a law, the new Bharatiya Sanhita Nyaya Sanhita, still read it properly, it says death penalty. What will the perpetrator do? Knowing fully, their gyan hai sab perpetrators. They will kill the woman, yeah. It's as simple as that. They will just make sure that she doesn't give evidence. And if they are children, then you can imagine the threat, the intimidation, the community घेराव and बहिष्कार जिसको कहते हैं ना, outcasting the community, not having any kind of economic relationships, all that plays out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, which is what is more interesting, right? Like, because when you see rape or sexual violence as a community dynamic, as a caste dynamic, as you said, when entire villages are involved or your caste group is involved, then it doesn't stop at the instance of sexual violence, as I noted in many of your stories, right? It goes on through intimidation, through humiliation, all through economic sanctions on a particular family or community. So there's just so much, like, there's a wider implication of everything, right? It's not just the solitary instance of sexual violence that it stops with then. And which is why it's so important to think about caste here.
Yes.
So you also highlighted very much the importance of properly trained and sensitized local activists and NGOs that can intervene in a sensitive manner. And how do you, like with the NTWL, how do you plan to go about training grassroots activists or grassroots leaders, as you mentioned?
So what we have been doing is state-wise training. It's ongoing. Training is happening as an ongoing process. There are levels. So first we begin with identity and gender and things like that. Then we also train them on the operationalization of the law. Then we talk at the level of self and what is this self and how does it engage with the actors. We do leadership training. How do we talk to police? How do we assert ourselves as activists? Because that's very important. I'm coming from maybe the same village or a village nearby, and I am trained. I have maybe also gone into do law, but still I'm not confident. So how do we build that? That training is ongoing.
So my last question is almost like a cliched question, but what do you make of like selective media outrage, and why do you think it's only certain instances that sort of seem to shake up the collective conscience?
I think the media is very much part of the political scenario of the country, whether it's social media or it's newspapers, and also media is about saleability and how many likes you get and how much circulation you get. Earlier media was not like that. There was a cause which drove them. But today, unfortunately, they have to survive and being pragmatic. So they would much rather publicize even assault issues which get them traction in the social media, which maybe the Adivasi issues of, Adivasi rape and assaults will not get them that traction, because many of them are being funded by those very houses which have created, the corporates, which have created this situation. And they don't want to do anything for the Adivasis. They just want to displace them. So the bigger picture is of displacement. It's about acquiring their land for extractive industries, yeah? So why would they? Why would the social media, which is thriving, who's being funded by these organizations, why would they report on Adivasi sexual violence? Yeah, they'd much rather be happy that they are branded as Naxalites or urban Naxals, whatever you want to, label them, and be arrested. And after that, what happens to them is not the concern of the media, the popular media, or even social media, because social media is also made up of people, na? And people coming from very same privileged classes and castes.
Let's hear now from Augustina Soreng, who is one of the grassroots activists working with the National Council of Women Leaders.
तो मैं झारखंड के सिमडेगा जिले में रहती हूँ, जहाँ पे 72% पॉपुलेशन हमारी आदिवासी आबादी है। और झारखंड का रीजन बोला जाए तो ये दक्षिण छोटा नागपुर रीजन आता है, जिसमें खूंटी, गुमला, लोहरदगा और सिमडेगा जो जिले हैं, रांची भी उस पे पड़ता है। तो इसमें आदिवासी बहुलता वाले ही सारे जिले हैं, और इन्हीं जिलों पे हम आदिवासी महिलाओं के मुद्दे जैसे कि मानव तस्करी, पलायन, डायन कुप्रथा, बाल विवाह, और फिर अभी जिस तरह से 2-2.5 सालों में हम बहुत अधिक देख रहे हैं यौनिक हिंसा के जो मुद्दे हैं, उसको लेकर के काम करते हैं। तो ये दक्षिण छोटा नागपुर एरिया है, और आदिवासी जिले हैं ये सारे 3-4 जिले, गुमला, लोहरदगा, सिमडेगा, रांची, ये सब।
तो आप जैसे बता रही हैं, अभी आपको लग रहा है पिछले कई सालों में यौनिक हिंसा के मामले तो अभी बढ़े हैं या रिपोर्ट ज्यादा होना शुरू हुए हैं?
रिपोर्ट तो अभी भी बहुत कई मुद्दे रिपोर्ट नहीं होते हैं, लेकिन कोरोना के बाद में ये बहुत मतलब कि बढ़े हैं। मुझे ऐसा हम लोग को जो देखने को ऐसा महसूस होता है जब हम कम्युनिटी में बात करते हैं, तो ये जो मोबाइल बहुत अधिक प्रचलन में आए और इंटरनेट में इतना जो खुला सब कुछ चल रहा है, जिस तरह से फोन वीडियोस की इतनी बाढ़ आ रखी है, इन सारी वजह से। और फिर जो किशोरियां है ना, उनके हाथ में भी मतलब कि मोबाइल आ गए, जिसकी वजह से थोड़ी ये प्रवृत्ति बढ़ी है। तो उससे पहले इस तरीके की बहुत सारी घटनाएं, चूंकि मैं 13-14 सालों से इस रीजन में काम कर रही हूँ और हमारे काफी नेटवर्क्स भी हैं जो लोकल नेटवर्क्स हैं, लेकिन उस समय हम लोग इस तरह के केसेस नहीं देखते थे, विशेष करके पोक्सो वाले गैंग रेप्स वगैरह वगैरह। लेकिन अभी मतलब ये बहुत बढ़े हैं। अभी ये 4 दिनों की मैं बात बताऊं ना, तो 2 गैंग रेप हुए हैं हमारे जिले में इस 4 दिन के अंदर ही।
अच्छा, तो मतलब ये आपको लग रहा है इंटरनेट और पॉर्न जितना आसानी से आजकल लोगों के पास मतलब उपलब्ध है, इसके कारण ये हो रहा है, आपको ऐसा लगता है?
हाँ, एक कारण तो ये भी है। एक कारण कहीं ना कहीं से ये भी है, क्योंकि जिस तरह से एक तो सेक्सुअल एजुकेशन हमारे यहाँ पे होता नहीं है, और जिस तरह से ये सब इस तरह से मिल रहा है कि मतलब कि लगातार इस तरह के केसेस हो रहे हैं। हम यहाँ एक हाल ही में मतलब कि 60 दिन भी नहीं होता है और यहाँ 3 केसेस तो रिपोर्ट होते ही हैं। और कितने ऐसे बात होंगी जो कि दब जाती हैं, जो कि बहुत हैरत का एंगेज करने वाला है कि मतलब कि स्कूल जाने वाली बच्चियां हैं, कोई कॉलेज जाने वाली बच्चियां हैं, और रास्ते में कुछ हो जा रहा है, कोई घूमने के नाम से कहीं गए, मेला से लौट रही है, कुछ हो गया। तो नहीं तो पहले से मतलब कि हमारे एरिया में इस तरह की ट्रेडिशन तो है ही कि मेले लगते हैं, बाजार लगते हैं, लेकिन पहले इस तरह की घटनाएं मतलब कि सुनने को नहीं मिलती थी।
अच्छा, लेकिन फिर जैसे आप तो जानती हैं, आप फेमिनिज्म से भी जुड़ी हुई हैं, तो जैसे हम जब ये कहें तो फिर इसमें ये एक खतरा ये भी आ जाता है कि जब आप महिलाओं के या युवतियों के या लड़कियों के उनके पास फोन होने की बात करते हैं, तो फोन तो उनके लिए फिर एक एजुकेशन और अलग अलग अपॉर्चुनिटी को मतलब एक्सेस करने का जरिया भी है।
हाँ बिल्कुल, मैं ये बोल रही हूँ ना कि लड़कों के पास मतलब देखिए, हमने इस पर एक CSW 67 के लिए भी हम लोगों ने एक रिसर्च में हम लोग कम्युनिटी के पास गए थे। कई स्कूलों में हमने सर्वे के तौर पे पूछा था कि कितने घंटे आपके हाथ में फोन रहते हैं, लड़कियों के हाथ में या फिर महिलाओं के हाथ में। तो वो तो उनके पास बहुत कम रहता है। उनके पास हो सकता है कि किसी का कॉल आया तब उनके हाथ में है, या फिर जिस समय उन लोग को किसी विशेष रूप से अगर अपना स्टडी करना है, उस टाइम पे अधिकतर समय पे लड़कों के पास ही मोबाइल होते हैं। और हमारे एरिया में तो ऐसा है कि हर घर में सब सदस्य के पास नहीं है, किसी एक के पास है, किसी 2 के पास है। तो वो फोन का एक्सेस भी पुरुषों के पास ही अधिक है, इंटरनेट का इस्तेमाल करने का भी जो ये है।
पुलिस और प्रशासन का क्या रवैया रहता है जब आप केसेस आगे लेके जाती है या जो केसेस रिपोर्ट हो पाते हैं?
पुलिस और प्रशासन की समझ भी जो है आदिवासी महिलाओं के प्रति वो बहुत अच्छी नहीं है, क्योंकि बहुतों को ऐसा पहले से पूर्वाग्रह रहता है कि चूंकि आदिवासी महिलाएं स्वतंत्र होती हैं तो उन लोग सेक्स की भी आदी हैं, इसलिए इनके साथ ऐसा कुछ हुआ। क्योंकि हम लोग 35-36 केसेस कराने में और उनके पीड़ितों के साथ में लगातार काम कर रहे हैं, तो महिला थाना भी अगर जाना हुआ तब भी उनका यही रहता है कि आप लोग कैसे मतलब कि किसी से बात कर लिए, किसी से मिल लिए, फिर ऐसा होता है तब आप लोग आते हैं। तो सहयोगात्मक रवैया नहीं होता है और तमाम प्रावधान है। अगर जब एट्रोसिटीज वाले केसेस भी रहते हैं, लेकिन उसमें भी 1 या 2 दिन तो समझिए कि थोड़ा उन लोग काउंसलिंग करके, एकदम रेप के केस भी रहते हैं ना, फिर भी से काउंसलिंग करके दबाने की कोशिश करते हैं। और अगर एफआईआर हो भी गया, बहुत दबाव के बाद एफआईआर हो भी गया, तो ऐसा प्रिटेंड करते हैं कि आप लोग के ऊपर एहसान कर रहे हैं, जो कि कहीं ना कहीं न्याय को बहुत सीमित कर देता है। कि मतलब ये नहीं मतलब महसूस नहीं कराते हैं कि आपके साथ गलत हुआ है, और गलत हुआ है तो कानून आपके साथ है, प्रशासन आपके साथ है, ऐसा फील नहीं कराते। वो लोग फील ऐसा कराते हैं कि आप लोग की भी गलती है, लेकिन आप लोग इसको रिपोर्ट कराना चाह रहे हैं, ठीक है हम लोग रिपोर्ट कर दिए और आपके ऊपर बहुत बड़ी मेहरबानी कर रहे हैं। इस तरह की मतलब की एक कार्यशैली है जो हम लगातार देख रहे हैं। हालांकि कितना भी बोल लीजिए, लगातार अफसर लोग की अदला बदली हो जाती है और फिर उसी तरह की मानसिकता वाले लोग आते हैं। तो ये एक तरह का जो हम देखते हैं कास्ट बेस्ड जो डिफरेंसेस है और अलग तरह का वायलेंस है, वो तो चलता ही रहता है, जो हम लोग फील भी करते रहते हैं। और हमारे समाज की तरफ से भी जो महिलाओं के साथ ऐसा होता है, तो समाज भी इसको कभी अपना मुद्दा नहीं समझता कि रेप हो गया है, लड़कियों की गलतियां निकालनी शुरू कर देते हैं। तो इस वजह से भी हम लोग बहुत मतलब कि कमजोर पड़ जाते हैं ऐसे मामलों में, क्योंकि ये राजनीतिक मुद्दा नहीं बनता है, समाज के लीडर इसको अपना मुद्दा नहीं कंसीडर करते हैं। और ऐसे में जो पीड़िता है उसके परिवार और उसके साथ बहुत जोखिम हो जाता है आगे तक, मतलब न्याय की लड़ाई में बढ़ने के लिए भी, और किसके पास मदद के लिए आए, इस तरह का एक अनोखा मतलब बहुत विचित्र सा हो जाता है पीड़िता के साथ। वो बहुत मतलब एक अलग तरह का ड्रामा है जिसको हम लोग खुद अभी तक सोल्यूशन नहीं निकाल पा रहे हैं कि क्या करना चाहिए ऐसे में हमें।
जी, तो मतलब जो आदिवासी नहीं है उनके मन में बहुत सारे पूर्वाग्रह हैं आदिवासियों को लेकर कि वो ऐसे होते हैं, वो ऐसे होते हैं। तो इसको हम किस प्रकार से मतलब सेंसिटाइज कर सकते हैं, जो लोग पुलिस में है, जो लोग गवर्नमेंट में है, उनको?
मैं तो यही कहूंगी कि सेंसिटाइज करने के लिए पहले तो उन्हें थोड़ा बहुत जिन आदिवासी इलाके में पोस्टिंग होती है तो वहाँ आने के बाद में वहाँ के कल्चर के बारे में और वहाँ के लोगों की प्रवृत्ति के बारे में समझने की कोशिश करना चाहिए। क्योंकि ये रिसर्च भी बताते हैं कि आदिवासी कम्युनिटी जो है, उन लोग चूंकि प्रकृति के साथ रहने के आदी होते हैं और शोरगुल और बहुत अधिक प्रतिस्पर्धा या फिर चकाचौंध के बीच में रहने के आदी नहीं है। और यही कारण है कि मतलब कि बहुत सारी जब भी आप कुछ देखिएगा तो उनके प्रवृत्तियों के बारे में संकुची प्रवृत्ति, सरल स्वभाव है, अधिक बोलते नहीं है। तो इस वजह से मतलब कि उनके साथ में जब तक एक उनको बिल्कुल जब तक विश्वास नहीं हो जाता है कि ये व्यक्ति हमको मेरे ही जैसा मतलब मैं जैसा हूँ वैसा ही हमको मतलब कि स्वीकार कर रहा है, तब तक उन लोग थोड़ा सा एक तो नर्वस होते हैं। और पुलिस और प्रशासन की बहुत सारी प्रक्रियाओं से अभी भी बहुत अधिक आदिवासी कम्युनिटी बिल्कुल अनभिज्ञ है, क्योंकि उन लोग अपने रीति रिवाज, अपने जो कस्टमरी लॉज वगैरह हैं उसको बहुत अधिक मतलब कि फॉलो करते हैं, उसको लेकर के चलते हैं। तो इसलिए जो संवैधानिक प्रक्रियाओं के तहत जो कुछ बना हुआ है अभी उसके बारे नहीं जानते हैं, जिसकी वजह से अगर वो जो प्रशासन के पास आ रहे हैं और उनको जो बोल दिया जाए तो उन लोग उसी को सच मान लेते हैं। तो यहाँ पर जो हम देखे हैं अपने यहाँ पे काम करने के दौरान कि एक थाने में तो 15 साल की बच्ची को बता दे रहा है उस थाना वाला कि 15 साल की आपकी लड़की हो गई है, तो वो अब जिससे शादी करेंगे बोलेगी या तो किसी के साथ जा रही है, तो वो उसका अपना डिसीजन है, हम लोग कुछ नहीं कर सकते हैं। तो वो जो गाँव से आया है वो माँ बाप ना बिल्कुल निरक्षर है, उनको नहीं पता। वो उस बात को लेके बैठ गया कि अरे पुलिस तो बताई कि 15 साल की मेरी बेटी जवान हो गई है, तो इसी के लिए वो अगर कोई लड़का उसको गाड़ी में बैठा के ले गया है और उसके साथ शादी करेगी तो गलत नहीं है। तो ये सब चीजें जो है ना कि मतलब मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि उनको अगर हमारे कम्युनिटी के प्रति जानकारी नहीं है। प्लस अगर उन लोग अपने ही मतलब कि जो कर्तव्य है, नौकरी करने से पहले लोग बहुत मतलब कि पढ़ाई करके आते हैं, हम पूरी तरह से कि संवैधानिक रूप से हम निष्पक्ष होकर काम करेंगे, अगर उसी को फॉलो करें तो मतलब कि बहुत सारी चीजें आसान हो जाएंगी। लेकिन चूंकि पावर बहुत ये हो जाता है, मुझे ऑफिशियल लोगों में दिखता है कि उन लोग के ऊपर पावर इतना हावी हो जाता है कि इवन अगर प्रेम प्रसंग के मामलों में भी थाने जाती है महिलाएं तो चिल्ला कर ही लोग बोलते हैं। पता नहीं क्यों उनके अंदर ऐसा हो गया है, मतलब उनको काम का इतना बर्डन है, चाहे जो कुछ है, लेकिन चिल्ला के ही जो बात करते हैं ना, अधिकतर लोग उसी समय में तो डर जाते हैं।
वो बात भी है। मतलब आप अगर आप एक आदिवासी या दलित महिला है या पुरुष भी है तो एक तो आपको मतलब ट्रीट ही अलग तरह से किया जाता है, आपकी डिग्निटी उतनी शायद समझी ही नहीं जाती जब आप पुलिस के पास जा रहे हैं या आप।
हाँ बिल्कुल, उनको लगता है कि अरे इन लोग इसी लायक है, इसी के लिए इनके साथ ऐसा हो जाता है, इन लोग ही खुद मिसबिहेव किए होंगे तब कोई ऐसा किया। इस तरह की मतलब कि पूर्वाग्रह की चीजें, मतलब कि ना केवल पुलिस में, किसी भी डिपार्टमेंट में है, काफी लोगों को ऐसी मतलब गलतफहमियां हैं और इसकी वजह से बहुत सफर करना पड़ता है हमारे कम्युनिटी को।
So Augustina talks about the increasing cases of gang rapes in her community, in the villages she works in, and she thinks that one of its causes is the easy availability of pornography on the internet, which young men are consuming, in the absence of proper sex education in schools and colleges. She also speaks about the prejudices of police and government officials against the Adivasi women, that they are promiscuous, that they are sexually free. So many a time they are blamed for the sexual violence against them. Their allegations are not taken seriously. And even when the police registers a complaint, they make it seem like a favor to these women instead of providing them with the necessary support. And for the most part, the Adivasi people are also ignorant of laws and the provisions for them in the Indian Constitution. So they're either afraid of the authorities or they take whatever the authorities tell them at face value. So the challenges are manifold. It is the absence of education and awareness of their rights amongst Adivasis, but it is also about the representatives of the state not viewing them as equal citizens deserving of justice. I hope that this episode has shed light on the experiences of sexual violence faced by Dalit and Adivasi women, which are both about gender but also about caste and class.
You've been listening to Kaam Ki Baat, a podcast on women, work, and everything in between, brought to you by Behanbox. Thank you for listening, and if you liked it, please do share with your friends. Until the next episode, bye-bye.